Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn out a poem 574, My First Well Day Since Many Ill. Now, in many ways, we read this poem from a number of perspectives because Emily struggled with illness in her life several times, and apparently there was a time in her life when she was so ill that she got sick in the spring, and she didn't come out really of her house to see even the sunshine, to hold in her hands is the way she'll say it here, until late summer, early fall. Now, speaking of fall, many have said that Emily is in large measure responding to Keats's famous To Autumn. We've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net. You'll remember this set of lines though. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatched eaves run, to bend with apples the moss-thatched trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells, with a sweet kernel to set budding more, and still more, later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease. And then the poem goes on. And again, Emily loves, I think, in many of her poems to respond to John Keats, and here she'll play the same game. Now, some have seen this as another theodicy, the question of why must there be pain and suffering in the world, and illness, it will be what's spoken of here. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as our preceding 573 poems. We just finished with 573, The Test of Love is Dead. Now, we are back to Emily's love of opposites. And as has been pointed out, when we study the letters of Emily, we get to letter 275, sent to Sam Boyles in November of 1862. She tries to persuade him to take some rest before returning to work, and this is how she ends her letter, quote, "Do not yet work. Besides, there is an idleness more tonic than toil. The loss by sickness, was it loss, or that ethereal gain you earned by measuring the grave, then measuring the sun?" And of course, we'll see these lines played out here as well. I want you to pay attention to the mathematical ending of this poem, especially with the use of the word measure. She says it this way. "My first well day since many ill, I asked to go abroad and take the sunshine in my hands and see the things in pod. A blossom just when I went in to take my chance with pain, uncertain if myself or he should prove the strongest one. The summer deepened. While we strove, she put some flowers away and redder-cheeked ones in their stead, a fond, elusive way. To cheat herself, it seems she tried, as if before a child to fade tomorrow, rainbows held the sepulchre could hide. She dealt a fashion to the knot, she tied the hoods to seed, she dropped bright scraps of tint about and left Brazilian threads on every shoulder that she met. Then both her hands of haze put up to hide her parting grace from our unfitted eyes. My loss by sickness, was it loss, or that ethereal gain one earns by measuring the grave, then measuring the sun?" Now, it is an interesting poem because it begins by just her making an observation. Man, I was sick for so long, I didn't even get out. And by the time I finally got out, summer was basically over. Notice, first well day since many ill. We'll go from ill to pain here in a second. I asked to go abroad. Now, who did she ask? This is interesting. This is again playing into that notion that Emily oftentimes is so taken care of that she has to respond. Is it to her father? Is it to her mother? We don't know. I asked to go abroad meaning I get to go outside, and take, it's a brilliant, brilliant way to say it. The sunshine in my hands, go back to poem 131 in her use of sunshine, in my hands. By the way, notice the use of hands in this poem. By the ends, it's the hands of haze of fall or autumn. And see the things in pod. In other words, I want to see how everything grew. a blossom just when I went in other words, the spring when she got sick, to take my, notice she calls it chance with pain, from illness to pain. Uncertain if myself or he should prove the strongest one. It's a fascinating way to say it. In other words, she sees her illness as a competition with pain. Well, who's going to win? Who's going to make it all the way through the summer? The summer deepened while we strove, right? This is an interesting use of the language, right? We're competing against each other. She puts some flowers away, the summer, right? Notice pain is given he pronoun. Summer is given the female she pronoun, right? The summer deepened while we strove. She put some flowers away and read her cheeked ones in their stead. A fond, elusive way. This, in other words, it's amazing how everything changes. What's the point, too, right here that she's making? Life went on. I was sick, but everything kept growing. Summer kept doing its job, right? We can't help but think of something, that kind of naturalism of Crane's Red Badge of Courage might come to mind here. To cheat herself, and one scholar has pointed out this is maybe one of Emily's cruelest similes. To cheat herself, in other words, to try to prove to herself, Summer, that it wasn't actually ending. It seems she tried as if before a child to fade. Tomorrow, rainbows held the sepulchre could hide. Now the grammar here is strange. The word picture is a bizarre one. As a child is dying, holding up a rainbow for the child to see so that the child doesn't have to see the sepulchre or the death that's inevitably coming. By the way, Faye did have a marginal note with the word die. Emily possibly thinking of that word instead of fade. Then, to finish, how does summer end? She dealt a fashion to the nut. She tied the hoods of to seeds. She dropped bright scraps of tent about and left Brazilian threads on every shoulder that she met. Brazilian will take us back, by the way, to 541, and I'm hopeful that you're paying attention to the verbs here that she uses. Put up to hide her parting grace. And again, this put up takes us back to Keats's Autumn, doesn't it? Put up to hide her parting grace. Emily will use this word grace in 54 of her poems. Go back to 571 where she used it. You'll see it again with superior grace in the next poem, 575. From our unfitted eyes. Now notice we go from hands of haze, sunshine in my hands, to hands of haze. Put up to hide her parting grace. In other words, it's the end of the summer. From our unfitted eyes. Well, by the way, get to in 575, eyes can see. In other words, everything has changed. And of course, what game are we playing? This is the Platonic game of Republic 7, no doubt, right? Cave allegory and all of that. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Then, after all of this, which is just a poetic way to say, I was so sick that I didn't even get to see the summer, so I had to take a walk at the end of summer when basically it was over and fall was ready to begin. But then, as is typical of Emily, she'll ask a question about how we fully appreciate the good things in our life. And it usually for Emily comes through, of course, the pain, the illness, the suffering of her life. My loss by sickness. And then notice the dash. Was it loss? One of the reasons we call our series Chats with Emily is because she plays this game, very Walt Whitman-like game, right? Was it loss? Or that ethereal gain one earns by measuring the grave. You'll remember this measure from 561, right? When we played that game very recently. I measure every grief I meet with narrow probing eyes. One earns by measuring the grave, then measuring the sun. The point here being, you don't really fully appreciate the value of the sun until you get stuck indoors ill and you don't get to fully enjoy it, appreciate it in some profound way. Now, we're going to come back to this poem when we do a couple of poems. When we do 1071, we're going to come back to this poem. On the world you colored, morning painted rose, idle his vermilion, aimless crept the glows over realms of orchards. I the day before conquered with the robin misery, how fair, till your wrinkled finger shored the sun away, midnight's awful pattern in the goods of day. And then when we get to 1540, we'll come back to play the game as well. As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away, too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy, a quietness distilled as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in, the morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace, as guest that would be gone, and thus without a wing or service of a kneel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Now, what exactly is the point of a poem like this? I think your argument is that it's all about perspective. Illness is the way that we get taught the value of health. I mean, in our health, we normally don't think about how amazing it is to be healthy. It's only when we're ill and we're struggling that we begin to appreciate it. At 2b, I love the verbs of this poem. I love the simile of showing a child a rainbow to try to distract it from death, to speak about what summer is trying to do at the end of summer, as we all have to get ready for the fall or the autumn. At 3a, well, we mentioned obviously Keats's To Autumn. I can't help but read this poem and think about Wordsworth's lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. Remember what he said about the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. Finally, at 3b, when was a time you learned something through pain, through illness, and on the other side you realized you measured well? Thank you.